Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Greidick. I'm Dr. Martha Greidick. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. Burnout is not a new topic of conversation. Even if you look at this podcast, I've talked to you about burnout before. Today I want to address burnout as it relates specifically to high achievers. Let's start by defining burnout. Burnout is simply a state of exhaustion, whether that's physical, emotional, psychological exhaustion, or all of the above. And it comes on as a result of prolonged or repeated stress. Research does indicate that burnout tends to be more prevalent for people who would be considered high achievers, or even for people who are very highly dedicated to their work or to their careers. It's not difficult to understand how that would happen. High achievers tend to say yes to more things, more responsibilities, more work when it comes to their work and their career. They also tend to put work and everything related to their career ahead of themselves, over self-care, for example. Companies contribute to the problem because they tend to overload high achievers with more work or more demanding work or more stressful work. Companies also tend to use overachievers as a means of compensating for underachievers or other employees who do mediocre work at the company. And lastly, many companies tend to add to an overachiever's workload by asking them to do things that maybe have nothing to do with their job. You already understand what burnout is. Let's talk about some of the more common causes of what brings on this state of burnout, especially when it comes to overachievers or high achievers. First and foremost, it's likely that there is simply too much work. Too much work, too many responsibilities are one of the biggest contributors to stress at the workplace, and of course, this can lead to burnout. Another thing to consider in terms of what can contribute to burnout is a simple mismatch between the individual's personality and their job, or even maybe their team they're on. We can take that one step further and say that if there is a mismatch between an individual, their personality, who they are and how they work, and the company itself or the company culture, that too can lead to prolonged or repeated stress, which can then lead to burnout. Something like conflicting job demands or a lack of resources can certainly contribute to stress and burnout in the long term. And even something as seemingly simple or innocent as job ambiguity can really contribute to one's stress at work and over time lead to burnout. These are especially important when we look at high achievers at the workplace. What are some of the most common symptoms of burnout? First, it can be the feeling of overwhelm, being overwhelmed or easily overwhelmed by daily tasks and responsibilities. Along with that can come feelings of exhaustion, whether that's physical, emotional, or psychological exhaustion. Loss of motivation or enthusiasm, and certainly decreased performance can all be significant signs of burnout at work. Having a difficult time concentrating or even making decisions can also be a symptom of burnout. Feeling detached or disconnected from one's work, from the company, or even from one's colleagues can be a big indicator of burnout. And of course, things such as an increase in cynicism or negative talk can be a dead giveaway when it comes to identifying burnout. Changes in sleep patterns, for example, not sleeping enough or sleeping too much or having difficulties staying asleep after you fall asleep, those are also potential symptoms of burnout. Physical exhaustion as a result of sleep issues can also present itself as a symptom of burnout. With that, of course, can come emotional exhaustion, which can lead to things such as irritability and mood swings. So those are important to be on the lookout for when we think burnout at work. And of course, physical symptoms, headaches, muscle tension, all kinds of physical sickness and illnesses can also be associated with burnout. It's important to pay attention to not only your emotional and psychological well-being, but also to your physical health. Let's talk about prevention and recovery. It's no surprise that if we want to prevent burnout or help to recover from the state of burnout, it's important to address those things, which I've already mentioned, that contribute or cause burnout. The other thing to remember is that your focus, whether you are working on preventing or avoiding burnout, or you're looking to recover from burnout, your focus absolutely has to become one that is more directed inward. You have to focus on self-care. When we look at those who are heading towards burnout or who are already in the state of burnout, they tend to think about themselves and self-care last, and instead always focus on those things external to them, their jobs, their responsibilities, other people's needs. When we talk about preventing or healing burnout, we absolutely have to switch that focus to be mainly pointing inwards. That's not to say you will never give your time or attention to outward or outside demands, but the main focus of your attention as you're looking to recover from burnout or to avoid burnout absolutely has to focus inward and focus on self-care. And since we're talking about high achievers, it's important to mention realistic goal setting. That also includes the goal of how quickly you can recover from burnout or how quickly or effectively you can prevent burnout. High achievers tend to be satisfied with quick answers, quick results, rather than things where they have to wait for a long time for things to resolve or for goals to be achieved. So it's important to mention realistic goals because we are talking about high achievers in the sense of the burnout phenomenon. Something else that's important to consider is the responsibilities associated with burnout. There may be some assumptions or even finger pointing indicating that high achievers somehow brought the burnout on to themselves or have earned the burnout because of being high achievers. But while they certainly may contribute to the end result, they are not the only contributors to the end result. Employers absolutely have to recognize their own responsibility and as well as their power of prevention and power of recovery for anyone who is heading towards burnout or who is already in burnout, especially their high-achieving employees. Employers cannot continue to add to the high achievers' plate simply because of their competence. And we see this happen time and time again, where competent people seem to be forever punished with more work and more responsibilities. So employers absolutely have to stop doing that, because this is how you burn out some of your best employees, some of your best team members. Besides simply avoiding doing the kinds of things that contribute or lead to burnout, employers must also become a support system, source of resources and support that will facilitate avoiding and preventing burnout, as well as recovery from burnout. So this is very much a joint venture when it comes to burnout and high achievers. The company has just as much responsibility in this as the individual employee. And being a high achiever, although that in itself can certainly contribute to burnout, that cannot be used as an excuse or a reason or a way to blame individuals for being burnt out. And of course, everybody has the responsibility and the opportunity of educating themselves to understand what burnout is, what causes it, early signs of it, so that prevention and active recovery efforts can be brought forth. This is equally as important for individuals as it is for employers. As this comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Burnout is not a new topic of conversation, but burnout among achievers is one that may not always get the attention that it deserves. High achievers tend to be more susceptible to burnout for many reasons, some of which are as simple as saying yes to everything and putting work ahead of one's own needs and well-being. Burnout is a state of overwhelm that affects physical, emotional, and psychological well-being and is often associated with prolonged exposure to stress. Symptoms of burnout can vary greatly, from lack of motivation and low productivity to physical symptoms, as well as psychological and emotional upset. Some of the most common causes may include overwhelm brought on by too many responsibilities or too many tasks at work. And of course, employers can contribute to the problem by assigning more work and responsibilities to those employees who are considered high achievers. Feeling overwhelmed or psychologically and or physically exhausted are some of the signs of burnout. It's important to be on the lookout. We may find ourselves identifying burnout in its beginning stages or as a full-blown state of being. It is important that both individuals and organizations pay attention to any kind of signs or symptoms of burnout, so that an appropriate response can begin. Avoiding those things which cause burnout is a good start as a means of prevention. It's important to remember that an inward focus where one puts their own health and well-being ahead of everyone else and everything else, especially in terms of work, is critical. And while that may not happen 100% of the time, the vast majority of your focus should be inward, especially when you are recovering from active burnout. And of course, it's important to remember that organizations have a tremendous responsibility in terms of burnout prevention and recovery, since organizations are often a big contributing factor to burnout among high achievers. As this week unfolds, I encourage you to consider burnout as it applies to you and your organization and workforce. Whether you're an individual in a non-management position or someone in a leadership or management position, we all have the responsibility to work towards burnout prevention and burnout recovery. Contribute to the solution and not the problem. For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I'd like to invite you to check out my YouTube channel, Stress Free with Dr. G, where you can find the video version of this podcast. In addition to the podcast videos, you can also find videos that pertain to stress management. So I encourage you to check out Stress Free with Dr. G on YouTube, and the link for that is in the description below. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.